Okay, so another type of wood that I've had a lot of experience with that I've used quite a bit over the years are cedar fence posts. Um, these are great. They're cheap, and orchids really like them. So what I typically do with these is I don't use this. I actually use a circular saw, and I typically cut these down the middle and then make kind of uniform pieces. So they're typically a foot long. This is a 6-foot board. It's 6 feet by I think 5.5 inches. So what I'll do is cut these in half and then cut them every foot. So I'll get 12 mounts out of one piece of wood. These are awesome. The next thing, which is probably an even better choice, are redwood mounts. So typically with redwood, it's much more expensive. So what I usually do at Home Depot is keep my eye out for the pieces that are already cracked and broken. So I got these for 70% off. So these ended up being like $2 a piece for these. I'll just cut these into some random slices and get a whole bunch of mounts out of these. Okay, so with the cedar pieces, this is definitely not fine woodwork. These are orchid mounts, so actually the less uniform, I think, the better. So I typically just eyeball this, and I'm just taking I'm just taking a really small, light-duty circular saw, and I'm just going to go and split this one. So, not exact, but I don't really care. It's good enough. And I'm going to remove any little staples I got. And then here, I'm going to eyeball a foot. I have some specific orchids that I'm trying to mount that are going to be a little bit smaller. So what I actually might do with this is I'll cut this one to a foot, and then I'm going to make another one. I'm going to make another set of mounts on the next piece. I'm going to cut this in thirds, and I'm going to cut them also a foot. But I'm basing this, you're always basing the mounts. Remember this, because this is the most critical thing. You're basing the mounts on the mature size of the orchid. So if you're going to mount a little tiny seedling, or you're going to mount a division, you should do a little bit of research and figure out how big it's going to get. Because if it's something that's small when you get it and you think it's going to look good on a mount, and you put it on a tiny mount and it turns out to be a gigantic orchid, like some gigantic dendrobium or something, or a schomburgkia, which can get really big, you're going to run into problems. Sometimes it's okay and they can just turn into a ball of orchid, but other times they're going to outgrow the mount, and that's going to create problems. The other thing with mounts, and this is just as critical as the first thing, is you really need to choose your material carefully. If you're choosing a wood or like a bark or a wood or something that's going to break down too quickly, it's going to cause a lot of problems for you, because if it starts to decompose or disintegrate before the orchid gets big enough to support itself, then you're going to have problems. You're going to have to move the orchid, remount it, and it could just cause problems where the orchid never really recovers, or takes years to recover. So cedar is really good, redwood is really good, and other hardwoods are very good. Softwoods, just avoid them. Even if they look good, avoid them, because that wood is going to break down too quickly. So with that, just break the rest. And these are pretty much ready to go and set as mounts that are going to last for quite a long time, and the orchids are going to be really, really happy on them. And get quite far enough. Oh, it's breaking fine. And if you have it, like, you can see I'm being really rough with this. You can clean this up a little bit. Over time, a healthy enough orchid, their roots are going to cover all this. You can adjust this to make it look fine. The reason I'm actually going relatively quickly with this too, with this particular type, is because sometimes I'm mounting 100 orchids in a day. If I have a compot or a bunch of seedlings, I'm going to be doing a ton of these, and what I've noticed over time is that these things, they work themselves out, and they look good and they look fine over time. There are other things that you have to be careful of, and we're going to go over that in a little bit more detail later. The most critical thing is the way in which you mount them. This is fine, it looks a little bit rough, it'll look great once the orchid is mature. Make sure you get the orchid on there correctly the first time. That's a critical step. Next step in mounting is to take whatever your mounting wood is. So I have a pile here of mounts that I have made that I'm getting ready to put some orchids on. They're right here. So I need a handful of tools, and these are sort of in my arsenal, and this is what I have gotten to the point where I use, and I mounted probably a couple of thousand orchids in the last 10 years or so. So we need fishing line, a pair of scissors, a roll of wire, preferably the heavier the gauge, the better. What my recommendation would be is whatever the thickest gauge that you can handle when using a pair of pliers is the best option for you. So this is probably a little bit too thin for my needs, but we'll see that in a second. A hole punch, a single hole punch. These are invaluable for this process. I use, in this case, I have some soaked sphagnum moss. You don't have to use sphagnum moss. I use green moss as well. It really depends. I have a special situation here. I live in an area that gets over 100 inches of rain a year, so I'm really just using a tiny bit of moss, but some moss nonetheless, and then a drill with a drill bit. So all I'm going to do with all of my mounts is one at a time. I'm just going to take the mounts and I'm going to drill a hole around the top of it. So I'm going, I don't know, 3/4 of an inch to an inch down below the top of it and drilling a hole all the way through. And this is what we're going to hang the wire to. So one of the important things here is when you're choosing interesting wood. So this isn't interesting wood. This is just like wood, right? This piece is a little bit more interesting. This is like a funky piece. So deciding what's going to be the top versus the bottom on this, I kind of like the idea of having this to be the bottom. So I'm going to put the top up there. And then I already pre-drilled this one, I believe, but this was another choice. Just, you want to figure out what the most aesthetically pleasing place is. And so typically, I guess you don't want the thing to be upside down. That's actually the bottom of this. I'm going to reverse this. I already have a hole in here. It's not going to matter. The roots are going to go through that. That'll actually help it. I'm going to re-drill this, and I'm going to drill it. You want to drill the hole straight through where you want the orchid mounted. So I want the orchid mounted here on this one. So I'm going to drill right through the top. And the harder, really the harder the wood, the better when it comes down to it. So the fact that that was as hard as it was to drill through is, it's a good thing, because I think it's going to last a bit longer. I already drilled that one. So pretty quick and easy to do about, I don't know, 15 mounts there. All right, so the next step is the wire. So this is the way I do the wire. So this tool, they have a cutter, they have a flat end. This particular tool I've had for about 10 years, and it's been pretty fantastic. So what I want to do is I'm going to show a couple of different ways to do this. First of all, I'm just going to cut a length of wire here, and this is, I was going to guess how long this is, but let's actually see exactly how long this is. So this is a 9-inch piece of wire. So what I'm going to do, and I'll usually do these in bulk, but I'm going to take the wire and I'm going to take the end of it and I'm going to clip just the last bit and twist it over and crimp it down. And I actually want this little loop like that, and I want this to be as tight as possible. So I want it to look like that. And then what I'm going to do is take my piece of wood and figure out what the front is. So sometimes it doesn't make a difference, but let's find one where it does make a difference. So this one makes a difference. This was the throwaway bin at Home Depot. This is the one that was spray painted on the back. I'll probably, I don't know, sand this, but I actually won't sand it. I'm going to leave this alone and let this get washed away over time. But I don't want that to be the front. I want that to be the front. I want the orchid to go up there. This is what I want to see. So what I'm going to do is put this in with this pinched part like that. I'm going to pull it through a bit. Forgot one tool, and this is sort of critical for this step, but this is pure gold for this process. And the reason why is I put the wire mount in there, and I've got these. And the beauty of this now is I will go and I'm just gonna squeeze that in there. So now that's squeezed and tight in there, and I can go basically that tight. That's stuck in there pretty nice and good. And now I'm just gonna bend this bad boy up like that, and I'm going to give this a twist. I've seen a lot of different techniques. I've seen people tighten them. This is just how I prefer to do it. So I want this to be like that. So, and the benefit of this is that it will, and you can always adjust this obviously, but this will hang from something. This will hang from a pole. It'll hang from against a wall, tight against a wall. But you can tell too by this that this probably isn't really the appropriate gauge of wire for me. It's a little bit thick, it's a little bit thin, so it's probably okay for a piece of wood that's this light and for a small orchid. But you'll notice what'll happen is that if we start getting into something bigger, and we'll show this in a minute, but this is a big mount. This is a heavy mount of zohia. This is pretty hard wood, and this plant is right now small. This is going to turn into a humongous mount. This already weighs, I don't know, 2 pounds or something. That wire, this wire, is not going to cut it on this. So I'm not even going to put one of those mounts on mounts on here, or one of the hooks on here. I need some heavier gauge wire for this. But for these smaller mounts, these are about 12 inches long, and this is thin and long. For these guys, this is probably an okay gauge wire because I'm not going to be putting big plants on here anyway. The mature size of these is going to be pretty small.